My name is Aaron Collins, and 6 months from now, I'll be standing in a packed courtroom, staring into my father's eyes as I slide a stack of damning documents across the plaintiff's table. These, I'll say, are your lies in writing, and this, I'll pause, letting the silence hang, is the moment they bury you. The judge will rule in my favor. My brother Jason will storm out. And my parents, they'll be forced to watch as the legacy they tried to steal is legally sealed with my name on it. But back then, I was just 17, standing on a sun-bleached porch in Central Florida, clutching the armrest of a splintered rocking chair, already beginning to understand that justice would be something I'd have to take for myself. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And have you ever had to fight your own family to protect what's rightfully yours? Because this is how it all began. The Florida heat in July could make the air feel thick like soup, sticky, stubborn, and impossible to breathe through. It was one of those days when even the mosquitoes gave up by noon. I was barefoot on Grandpa Walter's porch, sweat soaking the collar of my t-shirt, when my older brother Jason swaggered up the gravel path with that look he wore like cologne, smug and sour. Jason was 17, but he carried himself like a politician already campaigning for a kingdom no one had asked him to rule. He had our mother's icy smirk and our father's way of making compliments feel like traps. "You look real cozy out here with the old man," he sneered, rocking back on his heels. I didn't look at him, just stared out past the screen door into the overgrown citrus grove, pretending I hadn't heard. Jason chuckled. "Have fun rotting with Gramps while I'm in Cancun sipping piña coladas with Mom and Dad." I turned then, slow and deliberate. "I'd rather learn something real from Grandpa than sit next to liars like you." That wiped the grin off his face for a split second. Then it came back sharper. "Still bitter they picked me for the trip. It's not about the trip." "Oh, then what is it, Aaron? That you're not the favorite, that they don't trust you not to embarrass them at the hotel? You mean like you did last year when you puked in the hotel fountain?" Jason's jaw twitched, but he didn't answer. Just flicked his sunglasses back on and turned toward the gravel. "Whatever, enjoy your hick summer. I'll send a postcard from the spa." His laughter echoed behind him like a taunt, fading only when the screen door creaked open behind me. "Don't waste your breath on that one," came Grandpa Walter's voice, rough like gravel, warm like sun-dried tobacco. I didn't turn. "He acts like they're royalty and I'm the maid." Grandpa stepped beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "That's 'cause they need him to play Prince." You scare 'em," I snorted. "I'm 5'3" and grounded for mouthing off. Real terrifying." "You've got more fire than the rest of them combined," he said quietly. "They know it, that's why they try to snuff it out." I turned then, looked into his weathered face. His gray eyes were sharp as ever, but there was a sadness behind them I hadn't seen before. "Then why don't you ever speak up when they treat you like a burden?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Because I'm teaching you how to win without yelling." I sat back in the old rocker, the wood groaning beneath me. "Jason said Mom told him I'm here 'cause they don't want me around the investors, that I'm unpredictable." Walter chuckled. "You are, and that's exactly what makes you dangerous." He reached behind the porch swing and pulled out a thick envelope. Legal pads, newspaper clippings, and something that looked like a deed slipped out. "Most people live their lives signing whatever papers someone puts in front of them," he said, flipping through the bundle. "Not you." "What is this?" "Homework," he said, eyes twinkling. "You're gonna learn why people lose everything, and how not to." I stared down at the papers, my pulse quickening. "You want me to study law? I want you to understand power. Because one day soon they're gonna come for what's yours, and if you don't know how to fight back, you'll lose it before you even realize it's gone." Something cold settled in my gut, not fear, clarity. "You really think they'll try to steal something from me?" "I know they will," he said. "Already are, but that's okay, baby girl." He leaned down until we were eye to eye. "Because this porch, this summer, this is where you learn to outsmart every single one of them." The funny thing about people who underestimate you, they rarely watch what you're doing right in front of them. To everyone else, especially my parents, I was just the awkward kid wasting a Florida summer in Grandpa Walter's creaky old house, playing checkers and sipping sweet tea. That's what I let them believe. And it worked. Every time they called, their tone was clipped and distracted, like they were already halfway through a mimosa at brunch. Jason stopped texting completely after week 2. Guess there weren't enough cell towers on the yacht. But inside that musty little house on the outskirts of town, something else was happening. While the cicadas screamed outside and the heat curled the curtains inward, Grandpa Walter and I turned his study into a war room. He called it legal conditioning. The first day, he slid a dusty old contract across the table like a poker hand. "Tell me what this says." I frowned at the text. "I mean, it's just a rental agreement, right?" "Read it again, out loud, slowly." I did, and halfway through, I realized I'd skipped the clause where the landlord was legally allowed to enter the property without notice under emergency conditions. Except emergency wasn't defined anywhere. "That's a trap," I muttered. Walter grinned. "Exactly. And that's the difference between the people who have power and the people who sign it away." From there, it became routine. Mornings were for statutes and civil code. Afternoons, he'd quiz me on contract loopholes or case law like it was a spelling bee. I started keeping notes, my own legal journal with sticky tabs and color-coded highlights. I'd never felt so awake. "You could have been a professor," I told him one evening as we sat on the porch, the sun slipping low over the treetops. "I could have been a lot of things," he said with a shrug. "But I had mouths to feed. And your grandmother, she was sick for too long, so I took what I knew and used it where I could." I nodded, staring out at the grove. "Why are you teaching me all this, though, really?" He turned to me with eyes that had seen too much. "Because someday, Aaron, they're going to hand you a piece of paper and say you don't own what's yours. And if you don't know what to look for, you'll believe them." That night, I stayed up late rereading everything. Wills, trusts, guardianship laws. The idea that someone could rewrite your future with the flick of a pen, it chilled me. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was getting ready. They still thought I was just wasting time with Grandpa. "Hope you're not getting too bored out there," my mother had said on the phone last week, right before bragging about Jason's latest internship shadowing a family friend who ran a golf resort. "I'm fine," I said. "Learning a lot, actually." She hummed dismissively, like I just said I was scrapbooking. And that's when I knew I had them right where I wanted them. They'd built their entire identity around control: Jason the golden boy, Mom the social climber, Dad the silent enabler. They were too distracted by their image to notice what was happening here. Too confident in the roles they'd assigned us: Jason the heir, me the leftover. That was their mistake. I was becoming someone they didn't know. Someone who could read between the lines. Someone who could win without yelling. And all the while, Grandpa watched quietly, letting the fire grow. The envelope was thick. Off-white with my full name, Aaron Marie Collins, typed in a clean serif font. No return address. No university crest. Just a strange weight in my hand, like it carried something more than paper. I found it wedged between a grocery store flyer and a credit card offer in Grandpa's rusted mailbox. When I opened it, my heart stopped. It was a scholarship, full ride. Tuition, housing, books, even a stipend, for law school. Not undergrad, law school. No interview, no essay, just "you've been selected," just like that. The letter didn't say who nominated me, but I didn't need it to. The moment I saw the final sentence, "Your potential has not gone unnoticed," I knew, Grandpa, it had to be. I walked into the kitchen, still holding the letter like a sacred artifact. He was sitting at the table with the crossword, sipping his second cup of bitter black coffee. "You," I said softly, holding up the paper. He didn't look up, just circled a word and said, "I knew you'd figure it out." "Is this even real?" I asked. "It's as real as your last 3 notebooks full of annotations," he said. "You've earned it." "But how? Old lawyers never die," he murmured, finally glancing up. "They just fund secret scholarships through former colleagues who owe them favors." My eyes stung. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't," he said. "I just gave a few people a reason to look. You did the rest." I wanted to hug him, to tell him how much it meant. But instead, I pulled out the nearest chair, sat beside him, and read the letter again in silence. The decision came faster than I expected. Maybe because it didn't feel like a decision at all. I packed the next day, stuffing my life into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag with a broken zipper. The apartment in Atlanta was waiting, tiny, overpriced, but close to campus. It would do. When I returned to my parents' house to pick up some of the things I'd left behind, textbooks, old clothes, a photo album tucked in the back of my childhood closet, they barely looked up from the dining room. Jason was bragging about his GPA at Stanford, some new course in global capital markets he thought made him sound worldly. "You're not seriously going to law school," my mother said as I hauled a box toward the door. "That's ambitious." I paused at the foot of the stairs. "It's already happening." "You know, Jason's internship might turn into a consulting offer," she added, like that had anything to do with me. "He's networking with the right people, Maybe you should have considered business instead. Jason grinned. Not too late to pivot. I looked at them, both of them, and saw it clear as day. They didn't ask where I got the scholarship. They didn't even pretend to care. Not once had either of them said they were proud of me. It was like my life was an inconvenience they hadn't budgeted for. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just walked out onto the driveway and slammed the trunk shut. As I turned the ignition, my mom finally came out, arms crossed, face drawn in forced concern. So, where are you going? I looked her dead in the eye and said, somewhere better. Then I drove away, not looking back once. The apartment smelled like paint and too many forgotten tenants, but it had a window that let in golden morning light and a door that locked behind me. For the first time, I had silence. Not the suffocating kind, but the kind that makes room for breathing, for rebuilding. I pinned Grandpa's letter above my tiny desk and placed his old legal casebook beside my laptop. As I unpacked, I found one of his handwritten notes tucked between the pages. Power without integrity is just noise. That would become my compass. I had a long way to go and no illusions about how hard it would be, but I wasn't afraid, because someone had seen the fire in me, someone who never needed applause to believe in my worth, and that was more valuable than any inheritance, more solid than any family name. They could keep their vacations and their praise for Jason's padded resume. I had something better, a future with my name on it. I didn't think the floors in my apartment could creak, but they did when Melody danced in. Melody Knox was my accidental roommate turned closest friend. We met during orientation at law school when I spilled half a coffee on her laptop. She called me a walking caffeine disaster, and I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. She moved into the apartment upstairs a few weeks later, and from then on, we were inseparable. Melody was bright, chaotic, and brilliant. She could recite legal precedents like song lyrics and wrote her outlines in highlighter rainbows that looked like crime scenes. But she was loyal, fierce, and most importantly, she never once looked at me like I didn't belong. My first year in law school wasn't easy. I had no family backing, no legacy network. While other students had internships arranged before midterms, I was juggling 2 part-time jobs to afford the metro. But I had Grandpa Walter's casebooks, and I had the drive. There were nights I'd fall asleep at my desk with flashcards stuck to my face. Melody would snap photos and threaten to use them as blackmail. You'll thank me when you're Supreme Court Justice Collins, she teased. And maybe I would. One chilly Friday evening, after a brutal week of exams, I came home to find a familiar car parked outside my building. My breath caught. It was him. He was standing at the door like he'd never left, Grandpa Walter, in his worn brown coat and driving cap, holding a paper grocery bag in one hand and something old and flat under his arm. I figured you'd forgotten what real food tastes like, he said, handing me the bag. Inside, a loaf of rye bread, sharp cheddar, and a jar of his homemade tomato soup. I didn't cry. I really thought I might, but I didn't. I've missed you, I said, quieter than I meant. He nodded once. You look sharper, eyes are different. I'm tired, I admitted. That too. He stepped inside, glancing around my small sunlit apartment, the law books stacked on the floor, my makeshift desk covered in notes and empty coffee mugs. Then he held out the flat object he'd carried inside, a folder, faded blue, the kind you buy in bulk during back-to-school sales. I took it carefully, the weight of it unfamiliar. I was cleaning out the attic, he said. Figured you'd want this. I opened the folder. And there it was, dozens of pages, doodles, stories, scribbles from when I was maybe 9 or 10, pages from my old notebooks filled with childish drawings of courtrooms and cartoon judges. Every single one signed the same way, Aaron J.D. I laughed in disbelief. I used to write this. You did, every single time. I don't even remember that. Well, I do, he said. Even back then, you knew who you were, long before they tried to rewrite you. I sat on the couch, clutching the folder, flipping through the pages. A sketch of me standing behind a podium, a badly drawn gavel, a sentence scrawled in purple marker. I will fight for people no one listens to. I swallowed hard. Why did you keep these? I asked. Because I knew one day, when they tried to make you forget what you're made of, you'd need a reminder. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Me staring down at my own childhood handwriting. Him sipping the lukewarm coffee I offered without complaint. They're not going to stop, I said finally. My parents, Jason, they don't call, but I know that's not the end. They'll circle back when there's something to gain, Walter said. That's how it works. And what do I do then? He leaned back, eyes closed, like he was weighing the question in his bones. You remember who you were before they taught you to doubt it. And then, sweetheart, you bury them in evidence. I smiled. That sounds dramatic. It's only dramatic if you lose. That night, I tacked one of the doodles to my corkboard, a stick figure Aaron in a black robe, holding scales that tipped heavily to one side. Justice in my favor. Melody came over later and noticed it immediately. What's this? Proof, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Of what? That I was always meant to do this. The door to my first office stuck when it rained. The air conditioning rattled when it ran, and the cracked window above the receptionist desk let in a family of spiders I never had the heart to evict. But it was mine. Collins and Associates. The sign wasn't fancy, just etched vinyl on glass, but seeing my name up there for the first time made something settle in my chest. Something permanent. I'd done it. I wasn't waiting for someone to hand me power anymore. I was building it brick by brick, case by case, from the ground up. Just like Grandpa taught me. Melody was the first official hire. Associate was generous. She was part assistant, part researcher, part chaos manager, but she wore all the hats like a crown. The second was Deshawn, a tax law genius who dressed like he belonged in a GQ spread, but had a heart for helping people who owed the IRS less than the cost of a used car. We weren't taking on high-profile clients or getting quoted in Forbes. Not yet. But what we were doing was showing up for people who'd been overlooked, underestimated, ignored. Our clients were single moms fighting evictions, veterans battling the VA for benefits, small business owners blindsided by buried clauses. Every case felt personal. Every win electric. The work was exhausting, the hours long, but there wasn't a day I didn't want to show up. And in all that time, my parents didn't call once. Birthdays came and went. So did holidays. I sent polite updates, short, non-emotional emails. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't get one. That should have hurt, but it didn't, not really. Because I'd stopped expecting them to clap when I stood tall. I'd stopped looking toward people who only ever turned their heads. One Friday evening, I was reorganizing our little office bookshelf. Melody insisted we needed one for aesthetic purposes, when she popped her head in the doorway, chewing on a carrot stick. Guess who just popped into our inbox? She said with a sly smile. Please don't say Jason. Worse, your mom. I turned slowly. What does she want? Melody pulled out her phone and read with exaggerated dramatic flair. Hi, sweetheart, hope you're doing well. Your father and I heard from Aunt Marion that you started your own practice. So proud. Jason's job search is a little slow right now, but we know you understand the pressures of the legal field. By the way, we're wondering if you'd be able to help us review a few documents regarding Grandpa's estate planning, just to make sure everything's in order. Let's catch up soon. She looked up. End scene. I laughed, really laughed, the kind that bubbles up before you can suppress it. They really think I'm just going to forget everything? I asked, half to myself. Melody sat on the corner of the desk. They don't think they need forgiveness, Aaron. They think time is enough to wipe the slate clean. They didn't even ask how I'm doing, just slipped help us with legal stuff in like it was dessert. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the old familiar twist in my chest. Not sadness, more like recognition. That cycle of family amnesia where they rewrite history every time they need something. I told you, Melody said, her voice soft now. They'll come around when they need something. They always do, I murmured. I didn't respond to the email, not yet. Instead, I closed my laptop, stood, and walked over to the window. Outside, the streetlights buzzed to life as evening settled over the city. In the distance, I could hear someone playing saxophone, badly but with heart. This life, this firm, this purpose, I'd built it on everything they tried to convince me I didn't have. Tenacity, courage, intelligence, fire. They'd ignored it, tried to crush it. And now they wanted access to it. I turned to Melody. Remind me to buy a new front door. She tilted her head. Why? Because they're going to come knocking soon, and this time I decide whether they get to come in. The call came early on a Sunday morning. The kind of call that doesn't need an introduction, just the quiet voice of someone trying to sound steady, failing, a nurse from the hospice facility. I'm so sorry, Ms. Collins. Your grandfather passed in his sleep last night, peacefully. I whispered thank you, though I didn't know who I was thanking. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed in the gray pre-dawn light, feeling like the floor had shifted under me. He was gone. The man who taught me what power meant, who told me the truth before I knew to ask. who looked at me even as a child and saw me. And now he was just a voicemail I'd never get to return. I didn't cry, not then. Not even when I saw his name still pinned on the call list from 2 days ago. I'd meant to call back. Meant to tell him about the pro bono case we'd just won. About the woman we helped keep her small bakery after the bank tried to devour it. But I hadn't called. I'd been tired. I told myself he'd understand. 3 days later, I drove to the funeral alone. I didn't tell Melody, didn't bring anyone. This wasn't a moment I wanted to share, not yet. The old church was plain and small, tucked behind a row of dying oaks. Grandpa had never been much for religion, but he'd insisted on something quiet, nothing with velvet cushions or gilt. When I stepped inside, the smell of stale lilies hit me. So did the stairs. My parents were already there, seated front and center like royalty receiving guests. Jason sat between them, wearing a black suit too expensive for the occasion, checking his phone under the pew like he was waiting for the stock market to open. My mother saw me and gave a brittle smile. Look who finally remembered she's family. I didn't answer. I walked past her without slowing down, taking a seat in the back row, far from the cluster of cousins and old friends whispering behind their tissues. The casket was closed, per his wishes. No open displays, no drawn-out goodbyes. "I've done my talking in life," he'd said once. "I won't need a mic in death." The minister gave a short, forgettable speech. A few people stood to share memories, some sweet, some oddly rehearsed. My father didn't speak. Jason did briefly, with a tone like he was reading a corporate mission statement. And then it was over. Murmurs filled the chapel as people stood, hugging, smoothing coats, whispering condolences. I stayed seated until the room emptied out, just me and the casket and the quiet. I stepped forward, heels clicking on the tile, and placed my hand lightly on the wood. It was warm from the sun pouring through the stained glass. "I'll make you proud," I whispered. One last time. That was when I heard the voice behind me. "You know, you should have spoken," my mother said, arms crossed, her pearls gleaming even in grief. "You made such a show of being close to him." I turned slowly. "He asked me not to," her brows arched. "He told you not to speak at his own funeral." "He didn't want this to be about drama," I said. "Said funerals should be simple, not performance pieces." She bristled, her chin tightening. "Well, you certainly made it clear you think you're above all this." "No," I said, brushing my fingertips over the grain of the casket. "I just know what respect looks like." Jason stepped in then, phone finally tucked away. "You could have at least sat with us, people noticed." "I'm sure they did," I said. "That's usually what happens when a family makes their black sheep sit alone." My father cleared his throat behind them, quiet and uncharacteristically uncertain. "Aaron, now isn't the time." But it was the time. Because if not now, after the man who made me who I am had been lowered into the ground, then when? I looked at the three of them, perfect clothes, perfect silence, perfect lies. "You didn't deserve him," I said softly. "But he gave you grace anyway. Same way he gave it to me. The difference is I didn't waste it." Then I turned and walked out into the blinding Florida sun, where the air felt too hot to breathe, and the truth finally stopped burning. The lawyer's office was colder than it needed to be. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that squeaked when you shifted, a wall of silent books no one had opened in years. I sat alone for nearly 10 minutes before the rest of them arrived. My parents swept in first, dressed for optics, black cashmere and quiet resentment. Jason followed with that Stanford-starched look, jaw tight like he was bracing for a board meeting. No one said hello. The attorney, Mr. Halbridge, was in his 70s, with liver spots and a voice like dry leaves. He didn't ask how we were doing, just cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and got right to it. Walter James Collins executed a revised will 2 years ago which supersedes all previous versions. In it, he names one sole beneficiary. I felt my mother's breath hitch, sharp and immediate. My father blinked twice, slow and heavy. Jason didn't move. Mr. Halbridge continued, voice flat but unshakable. "All properties, financial accounts, and remaining assets totaling approximately $800,000 are to be transferred solely to Aaron Marie Collins." Silence, heavy, dense, immediate. "Then, what?" Jason's voice cracked like a snapped guitar string. "No, that's not, no way, that's not right." My mother's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "That must be a mistake. We're his children. I cared for him when no one else would." I almost laughed. Mr. Halbridge didn't flinch. "The will was witnessed and notarized. I have video confirmation from the day it was signed. Your father was of sound mind and body, and I can assure you he was deliberate. But Jason shot to his feet, pointing at me like I'd broken in and rewritten the documents myself. She hasn't even been around, she left, she cut ties. I stood then, calmly, slowly, the way Grandpa taught me. Maybe he left it to the one person who truly saw him, I said. The one who didn't need his money to visit, who didn't try to manage his legacy like a PR stunt. You think you're better than us, my mother spat. Is that what this is, some revenge fantasy? No, I replied, meeting her eyes. This is what happens when you spend years ignoring someone only to remember them when there's a check involved. My father finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Aaron, you know how this looks. I do, I said. It looks like a man who thought long and hard about who truly cared for him, who would carry his name with honor. Jason paced behind them, fists clenched. We'll contest. I don't care what paperwork you have. This is absurd. She's not him. I'm his grandson, too. I tilted my head. Yes, but you weren't his student. You didn't sit with him day after day while he fought to write legal essays through arthritis. You didn't hear the things he whispered when the world forgot him. Jason sneered. This is why he picked you, huh? Because you play sentimental better than the rest of us. No, I said, my voice low, because I listened. Mr. Halbridge cleared his throat again. There is one more item. Of course there was. He reached into a drawer and slid a sealed envelope across the table, thick parchment, Grandpa's handwriting across the front. To Aaron, you know what to do. I took it, hands steady, pulse louder than the air conditioner buzzing above us. Jason stormed out without another word. My mother hissed something under her breath I didn't bother to catch. My father lingered a moment longer, his eyes softening, not apologetic, just confused. Like he'd finally realized the rules of the game had changed. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of that office with the envelope in one hand and my future in the other. I waited until I was home, my apartment, my space, before I opened the letter. Inside were two things. A key. And a note. You already know where this goes. Everything I saved wasn't just for you. It was because of you. You carry more than my name now. You carry my fire. Don't waste it. I stared at the key, silver and plain, but I knew what it opened, the locked drawer in the old desk, the one he never let anyone touch. I would go there tomorrow. Tonight I let the truth settle in. They wanted him for what he had. I wanted him for who he was, and he knew the difference. It started with a knock. Not the gentle kind, the kind that echoes through your bones. 3 sharp raps against the glass door of Collins and Associates, now legally mine in every way. Melody opened it, her smile faltering the moment she saw the man in a gray suit standing there, clipboard in hand. Are you Aaron Collins? He asked, though it was clear he already knew. I am. He handed me an envelope thick enough to mean trouble. You've been served. I didn't open it until after he'd left. Just stared at my name printed across the front like it had no weight. Like it wasn't the beginning of war. Inside, notice of civil action. Filed by Charles and Lorraine Collins. Jason, too, of course, the claim that Grandpa Walter had been mentally unfit at the time of the will, that I had unduly influenced him in a state of cognitive decline, that the will was invalid due to manipulation by a self-interested party, me. I read every line slowly, letting the lies soak in. Jason was quoted as saying I isolated Grandpa, that I cut him off from family, that I coached him into rewriting his will during a period of medical instability. Melody sat across from me, mouth half open, waiting for my reaction. Well, I said, setting the papers down. They've officially declared war. Melody leaned forward, her voice low. They're calling him senile, I nodded once. And me a snake. What do we do? I looked down at the envelope. At the signature from their lawyer. Someone from a fancy boutique firm downtown who probably specialized in high-net-worth family drama. We don't panic, I said. We build our case, like Grandpa taught me. We stayed late that night in the office, the walls buzzing with fluorescent hum and quiet rage. I pulled out Grandpa's hospice logs, copies he'd given me over the months, along with every scribbled note he'd written on yellow legal pads. The man was obsessively organized. If he was slipping, there wasn't a trace of it in his handwriting or speech patterns. I remembered what he told me the last summer we spent together. They're going to try to make me forget. Let them try. I've left proof everywhere. I didn't know what he meant at the time. Now I did. Jason and my parents had filed their lawsuit fast, almost like they'd been waiting for the reading of the will. And I knew why. They had the money to throw at the problem. What they didn't have was truth. They're banking on the judge never seeing him in his final year, I muttered, flipping through hospital notes they'd attached to their complaint. This one says he was confused and belligerent. I was with him that day. He was quoting Hamilton and correcting a law student's syntax on Reddit. Melody laughed. Wait, Grandpa Walter was on Reddit. Only for legal threads, I said, grinning for the first time that day. And he only commented to correct people who were wrong about the Fourth Amendment. She whistled low. A rebel to the end. I sat back. The notes they're citing, they're shady. This doctor, I pointed at the name. He wasn't even his primary care physician, just someone from the ER when Grandpa had that fall. You think they paid someone off? I think they found a few scraps of confusion and spun them into dementia. Melody closed the files slowly. If those documents hold, they could reverse the will. I know. But if we can discredit the notes, they'll have nothing. I stared at the dim light reflecting off the office window. My reflection looked different now, sharper, tired but focused. They think they're the only ones who know how to play this game, I said quietly. Melody arched a brow. But they just wandered into a courtroom that belongs to you, I nodded. They're on my field now. That night I didn't sleep. I mapped out every timeline, every witness, every conversation I'd had with Grandpa in the last year. I called hospice nurses. Scheduled meetings with his friends from the legal library who'd still meet him for chess every Friday. I even tracked down the old barista who knew his weekly order, black, no nonsense, and a side of constitutional banter. Each person I called had the same response. He wasn't confused. He was sharp as ever. He still argued over comma placements. They'd tried to reduce him to a confused old man, but I was about to make them remember who he really was. Hospitals don't keep records out of kindness, they keep them out of necessity. Paper trails, signatures, timestamps. And if you know how to ask the right questions, you can unearth the truth even in the most polished lies. I started at the hospice center, the same one that called me the morning Grandpa passed, where his chart now lived in a locked cabinet behind glassy-eyed administrators and bored receptionists. Are you family? The intake nurse asked, glancing down at her monitor, not at me. I'm his granddaughter, I said, Erin Collins. Her fingers froze above the keyboard, recognition flickered across her face. Right, she said softly. He talked about you, a lot. That surprised me. She leaned in, lowering her voice. He called you the only one who still asks questions. I smiled. That sounds like him. A few forms and a signed waiver later, I had what I needed, full access to his records during the final 18 months. Not just the hospital entries. They included day-to-day nurse logs, psychological evaluations, even dietary notes. No mention of mental decline, no dementia diagnosis, no official red flags, but the document Jason's team submitted in their complaint, the one from that ER doctor after Grandpa's fall, nowhere in the main file. I called the ER myself. And just like that, puzzle pieces started falling into place. The attending physician from that day had rotated out months ago. The records were vague, full of hedging terms like possible confusion, unverified account, patient reports dizziness. Melody read through them with a magnifying glass almost literally. They're trying to frame one bad day as evidence of permanent incompetence, she muttered. This is Swiss cheese, Erin, it's full of holes. Which means, I said, we can tear it apart in court. Next stop, Walter's friends. I didn't realize just how many people Grandpa had kept in touch with quietly, under the radar. A whole constellation of barbershop buddies, former courthouse clerks, even a retired judge who still met him for coffee every other Thursday. Every single one had a story. Oh, that man was sharp, said Mrs. Hedrick, his next-door neighbor. He used to fact-check the news anchors out loud during Jeopardy. Are they really trying to say he was confused? Said Mr. Alvarez, who played chess with him at the rec center. He beat me in 4 moves 2 weeks before he passed. The hospice nurse I spoke to was even more direct. He was writing federal law essays for fun, she said. In cursive. She showed me a copy. A full analysis on the misuse of the Commerce Clause, written on hospice stationery. Not only was it articulate, it was dated 2 weeks after the alleged ER incident. He dictated it to me, she added with a small smile. Said his hands were stiff but his brain was still raising hell. I asked her to sign a sworn statement. She didn't hesitate. By the time I returned to the office, I had a stack of printed affidavits, 3 video clips from phone interviews, and 2 handwritten notes from Grandpa Walter in pristine cursive. Melody looked at the pile and let out a low whistle. They picked the wrong person to mess with. They thought grief would make me weak, I said. It made me dangerous. We stayed up all night building our defense, not just to protect the will, but to protect his legacy, because this wasn't just about money. This wasn't even just about me. It was about what it means to be seen, truly seen, and to have your truth spoken even when you're not here to speak it yourself. I pinned Grandpa's letter on the corkboard above my desk. You carry my fire, don't waste it. I wouldn't. I was going to walk into that courtroom with more than evidence. I was going to walk in with truth. The courtroom smelled like old polish and fresh nerves. I walked in wearing a vintage brown suit, simple gold studs in my ears, and my hair twisted into the kind of bun that said I'm not here to play nice. Melody stood beside me as we passed through the wide double doors. She squeezed my hand once. They have no idea what's coming. And she was right. Because across the aisle at the plaintiff's table sat my parents and Jason, flanked by two crisp-suited lawyers who looked like they charged by the syllable. My mother's eyes were narrowed, sharp with satisfaction. Jason smirked like a kid who thought he'd rigged the game. The room hushed when the judge entered. I recognized him instantly. Judge Harvell. He'd taught one of my guest seminars back in law school. A fair man. No patience for theatrics, but sharp. Always sharp. He looked over the docket, then his eyes landed on me. A flicker of recognition passed over his face. Miss Collins, he said, smiling faintly. Welcome back. Who are you representing today? I straightened my spine and let the words fall with precision. Myself, Your Honor. There was a beat of stunned silence. My mother actually gasped. Jason's face flushed with visible confusion. You didn't even hire a lawyer, my father said under his breath, barely loud enough for the court to hear. Jason laughed quietly. She's gonna represent herself with a law degree from Google. Judge Harvell raised a brow at their whispering. Any disruptions and I'll hold both sides in contempt. This is a courtroom, not a kitchen table. I didn't smile, but I felt the ground shift beneath me. Power doesn't always come in thunderclaps. Sometimes, it enters on a whisper you're not ready for. I laid my binder neatly on the table. Inside, copies of Grandpa's handwritten essays, sworn witness statements, transcripts from hospice nurses, video clips of his conversations, fully coherent, legally airtight. This wasn't just a defense, it was a reckoning. Across the room, the plaintiff's lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances as they realized something. I wasn't just some bitter granddaughter defending a will. I was an attorney, with receipts, with a record, and I knew exactly what I was doing. Judge Harvell adjusted his glasses. Miss Collins, he said, you may proceed when ready. I stood. And in that moment everything narrowed, all the years they mocked me, all the birthdays they forgot, all the times I was dismissed, ignored, rewritten. All of it led here. My voice was steady as I began. I intend to prove, beyond a shadow of doubt, that Walter James Collins was of sound mind when he signed his final will, that he did so without coercion, without pressure, and with full understanding of what it meant. That the only people trying to manipulate his memory now are sitting across the aisle. Jason's smirk vanished. My mother's jaw clenched, and my father finally looked ashamed. Jason wouldn't look at me. Not when I played the video of Grandpa reading a Wall Street Journal article out loud and critiquing its legal implications, 2 weeks before he died. Not when I handed the judge a sworn affidavit from Grandpa's hospice nurse, detailing how Mr. Collins was mentally sharper than half the staff. And especially not when I submitted Grandpa's own handwritten essay titled, Competence Isn't Age-Dependent, It's Attention-Dependent. That one made the courtroom go still. Their lawyer objected, of course, claimed it was hearsay, but Judge Harvell read through the pages with a slow, focused gaze before glancing over his glasses. I find this document persuasive, he said, and admissible. My mother whispered furiously into her attorney's ear, her pearls twitching at her throat like they were trying to run away. But it wasn't just the documents that made their case crumble. It was the way I used their evidence against them. That ER report they submitted, I said, circling the date on the screen. It happened during a fall. Grandpa was disoriented because he hit his head. Confusion post-trauma isn't dementia, it's medical science. And the attending doctor who signed this report never saw my grandfather again. Not once. Their lawyer tried to pivot, asked if Grandpa had ever expressed any resentment toward his children, if I'd manipulated him by isolating him in his final years. I didn't flinch. No, I said. He wasn't isolated. He was just ignored. Melody glanced at me from the gallery, eyes shining. And if you're looking for evidence of resentment, I added, voice calm and clear, perhaps you should look at the 27 missed calls from Walter Collins to his son in the final 3 months of his life. I let that sit. I had phone logs. Judge Harville saw them. No one across the aisle said a word. Their sides scrambled for rebuttals, but each attempt unraveled faster than the last. They tried to spin the inheritance as unexpected. I countered with 3 separate witnesses who testified to Grandpa's long-term plan to leave everything to the person who knew him best. Me. They tried to question my motive. I reminded the court I'd paid my way through law school without a dime from the Collins family, that I never asked for an inheritance, that this wasn't about greed. It was about honoring the final decision of a man they'd erased until it suited them to remember. When the final day of the hearing came, I stood once more, binder in hand, heart steady. I'm not just defending a will, I told the judge. I'm defending a man's voice, one they tried to silence, one they now claim was too broken to speak for himself. I turned to face them. But I listened. Every day I knew what he wanted, and I respected him when no one else did. Jason's face was stone. My mother looked like she might burst into tears, not out of grief but humiliation. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Miss Collins, that will be all. The decision came 2 days later, the will stood, the challenge was dismissed. Grandpa's estate was mine, every penny, every acre, every intention. I walked out of the courthouse with the sun warm on my face, Melody at my side, and the fire of justice still burning behind my ribs. They followed us out, lagging behind in silence. I turned back, just once, as Jason reached the sidewalk. You know, I said, voice low but lethal, next time you call me pathetic. He looked up, hollow and humiliated. Remember who buried you in court. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Because what could he say? I didn't win with luck, I won with truth, with precision. With everything they thought I didn't have, I didn't need their approval. I had something better. Proof. The money sat in the account for 2 full weeks before I touched a dime. Not because I was afraid of it, but because I wanted to be sure. Grandpa had left me more than property, stocks, or cash. He left me trust. And I wasn't going to squander that on a car or a beach house or some hollow badge of success. No, this was never about fortune. It was about function. One morning I walked into the office early, just me and the sound of the coffee machine sputtering to life. Melody showed up an hour later, still in sweats, her hair a frizzy halo. I had a dream you bought a yacht named Juris Doctor, she said, yawning. Please tell me that's not real, I grinned. Even better, she blinked. Better than a yacht, I turned my laptop toward her. The screen showed a signed lease for a new building, twice the size of our current office, 3 stories, walking distance from the courthouse. And underneath that, articles of incorporation for a new legal aid wing. Name, Walter Legal Group. Melody's mouth fell open. You're expanding. I'm dedicating a whole division to pro bono family law, housing rights, elder defense, people like Grandpa who the system forgets. Her eyes glossed with tears. You're really doing it. I am. We moved in 3 months later, new desks, a small staff, a sign out front etched in navy and gold, Walter Legal Group, Justice with Integrity. I stood on the sidewalk the day the sign went up, arms crossed over my chest, heart aching and proud all at once. He gave me more than money, I whispered. Melody stepped beside me, quiet. What did he give you? I smiled. He gave me back myself. The lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. Dozens of eyes watched me from the curved rows of seats, notebooks open, screens glowing, coffee cups clutched tight. They were waiting for something I used to chase with trembling hands, validation. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic, and took a breath. My name is Erin Marie Collins, I said, voice steady, gaze sweeping the room. And I didn't come from power. I wasn't born with connections or a name that opened doors. A few heads nodded slowly. I came from silence, from being told I wasn't enough, from being overlooked, underestimated, and most memorably, laughed at by my own family for believing I had something to say. A soft murmur rolled through the room. But I had someone who believed in me before anyone else did. He wasn't rich. He didn't throw parties. He didn't climb social ladders. He sat with me on a hot porch in Florida and handed me a casebook. They leaned in. I could feel them listening, the kind of silence that honors a truth. Some people inherit money, some inherit names. I inherited fire. A long pause, let that settle. And someone who taught me where to aim it. The applause came slowly, then built, genuine, erupting. But I wasn't finished. Look, I said, lifting my hand, you'll be told that law is about rules. That it's about knowing the right language, the right handshake, the right firm. And maybe that's part of it, but that's not why you're here. They watched me now like I was handing them a match. You're here because someone out there will need you to be the one person who sees through the fog, who doesn't flinch, who doesn't run. My hand went to the small locket I wore now, simple silver, Grandpa's photo tucked inside. I didn't need to open it. I felt him with me always. Carry your fire, protect it. But never let it burn people who are already on fire. Use it to light paths for those still lost in the dark. When I stepped off that stage, I didn't feel bigger than them. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. Because the truth is, justice isn't a destination. It's a fight you choose every day. And I will never stop choosing it.